This is a quick look at Compressor Audio Unit from Blue Mangoo Software. It's a really lovely, transparent mixing and mastering compressor that provides excellent control over dynamic range without coloring the sound. I can't say enough good things about it. For this example, I'm using it on each track except for the kick drum. We've got an unruly hi-hat that has one hit that is much louder than all of the rest of the groove. An Odyssey I synth part that has some loud squeals. And lastly, there's a rhythm guitar part that has a percussive click that's not quite loud enough compared to the chords. These are intentionally problematic tracks that represent sorts of problems that you might encounter where your EQ is fine, but where you need to control the dynamics. The hi-hat part has a hit that's about 7 dB louder than the rest of the groove, and we need to bring that down in relation to the rest of the groove in order to be able to hear the groove. Here we are in AUM with the Blue Mangoo compressor. I've set up the track so that when the loud hit peaks, it's at about 0 dB. Our goal is to use compression to bring down that peak without affecting the lower parts, and then when we add makeup gain, it will effectively make the quiet parts louder. That's because the gain is going to be turned down just on the loud hit and shouldn't be affecting the quieter parts when we get the threshold right. First, without adding any input or output gain, we're going to adjust the threshold so that only that loud hit gets quieter without affecting the other hits. And you're going to see up in the meters that the maximum volume is going to be coming down. The quiet parts shouldn't be getting any quieter as long as we have the threshold set correctly. Now we'll add some makeup gain to restore the maximum volume to where it was, which will have the effect of bringing the quieter parts up quite a bit. Now we're going to play around with the release a little bit. Now when the release is really short, the tail on that loud hit pumps a little bit. So we're just going to turn up the release until we stop hearing any pumping. Now one of the things that you'll notice here is that I have the attack set to 0, which normally you don't do with compressors. A lot of compressors really struggle with really short attack times and will end up distorting the signal or having funky artifacts. Here we have the original and the compressed signal so that you can compare them, and it's quite obvious that in the compressed signal there are some parts that are more prominent than they were in the original. Let's take another listen to the original signal followed by the compressed signal. I mentioned earlier that some compressors struggle with a really fast attack with something that has transients like a hi-hat. Here's an example of a compressor that wasn't able to deal with the super fast onset with a fast attack. You can see in the picture that there are these spikes at the hi-hat hits, and they're quite prominent when you listen to the sound. Let's hear the hi-hat in the track without the compressor and then with the compressor. The rhythm guitar part has a percussive click in the middle of it that should be a little bit louder, so I want to use the compressor to bring down the rest of the track, which will make that click more prominent. The synth track is a lot more straightforward. There are some high-pitched squeals that are about 6 dB too loud that pop in occasionally, and I just want to set up the compressor so that it brings those down in line with the rest of the track so that they aren't too piercing. I hope that was helpful. I found it a little bit challenging to demonstrate the Blue Mangoo compressor because it's so great. It really does a great job of controlling dynamics without altering the EQ. So it's very transparent. You almost don't know that it's working except where it makes things better. You're going to use this as a mixing and mastering compressor when you want to control the dynamic range of a track, but you don't want to affect the EQ in any way. And it does that really well. The envelope follower that it uses is fantastic. You can use it in some situations where some compressors really struggle. The user interface is simple, it's easy to use, it doesn't have a lot of frills, which I think is great because it lets you spend your time controlling the dynamic range and not worrying about a lot of parameters that are rarely needed.